Hi, everybody, and good afternoon. Here we are on the 7th of November, and we're talking about another storm and a potential hurricane coming to Florida. I want to start today, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Let me just acknowledge some folks from Pompano and Ocala and Stewart, Nocatee, and up in Virginia. Yes, you're going to get some effect from this, but not directly as a tropical system. Davie in Gainesville, and Davie, Florida, not Davie in Gainesville, and also from Gainesville and Key West, Jacksonville, Boca, Abaco, my good friends in Abaco in the Bahamas. And yes, you're going to get affected directly by this storm. I was there for the anniversary of Dorian, and it was a wonderful trip, and it was wonderful to be back in Marsh Harbor. And I know it's really tough there, and I feel for all you folks. This is not, I want to stress at the very beginning, this is not a Hurricane Ian or a Hurricane Dorian situation. This storm is not going to suddenly strengthen and turn into a super hurricane of some kind. There's a question of whether it'll ever turn into a hurricane. As a matter of fact, it's an entirely different kind of storm. It's not that it's not going to be a problem. It's not going to be disruptive. And some areas, especially from coastal flooding and so forth, could have problems. And these winds can knock out some power and that kind of thing. But it's not going to be a big, powerful hurricane that comes and causes tremendous devastation. That's not this storm. It's completely different. So if you guys have a question, if you would, put the question, about the stuff I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the forecast and everything here in just a moment. But put a Q and a colon and then your question, and that'll help me separate the folks that are just saying hi from all over. It's good to see you online here this afternoon. We have lots to talk about, and we have here most of this hour to talk about it. So go ahead and send in your questions, or maybe listen to what I have to say here, and then you can ask your questions. So first of all, take a look at this satellite picture here. And what you notice is that it doesn't look like any kind of tropical system. As I said, this is not, notice it's called subtropical storm Nicole. It's a hybrid between like a nor'easter and a tropical system. And we have to think about this in two parts. First of all, the strong winds are actually out in this band out here. And that's where the winds are 45 miles per hour. That's the estimate of the maximum winds in the whole system. Well, that's a long way from the center of lowest pressure, which is this icon over here. So the system is tremendously spread out. So it's not going to be at any time like a big hurricane where we're really interested in the track and the eye wall. That's where the damage is going to be. No, this is going to be spread out. So this is going to push a lot of ocean water toward Florida and the southeast over hundreds and hundreds of miles. It's less about the concentration near the center. So that's the first difference. Secondly, let's take a look at this center here. The center, you can make out the center of rotation in here somewhere. That icon is where the hurricane center puts it. But notice there's hardly any bad weather with it. There's a little thunderstorm cluster here. And if this system, in order for this system to become a hurricane, it has to develop around this center. Now, the hurricane center is forecasting that that's going to happen, that the bad weather, the thunderstorms are going to consolidate around the center over time. It's probably going to happen overnight tonight or tomorrow. That's the forecast, but that's not a certainty at all. This thing may just stay all spread out and sprawled out like this, forecasting when these things are going to actually transition from this subtropical, spread out, comma-looking shape into a tropical, more concentrated kind of shape is a very uncertain kind of thing. So we just put odds on it. The odds are that that's going to happen. Maybe it's a 60-40 thing. Certainly not a certainty. And if it doesn't do that, it's never going to become a hurricane. It's just going to be this big sprawling tropical storm that'll still cause problems, but a different kind of problems, as of course we all know. Now, one way we can look at this is we can look at how far out from the center the winds extend. So look at this now. So we started out with the idea of the storm intensifying some here tomorrow afternoon. And then by Wednesday afternoon, you see it's in the vicinity of the northern Bahamas. And that kind of reddish area is where we have hurricane force gusts. So the idea is that it will consolidate some around that center. That's the forecast. And we'll get 70-mile-an-hour winds, plus or minus maybe some hurricane force gusts affecting the northern Bahamas tomorrow afternoon. But look at how far out the winds extend that are tropical storm force, 40 miles per hour or higher. Way out, all the way up to the Georgia coast. So this is a tremendously large circulation that is going to affect the entire state of Florida, and that's why we have storm surge watches up all the way from Brunswick, Georgia, all the way down the coast, because it's going to put a tremendous amount of energy into the ocean as the circulation comes around like this and is pushing the water toward the coast, and it just keeps doing it and keeps doing it. It's already doing it. Already the water is above the normal levels right now along the coast by about a foot in South Florida, a little less farther north, but it's just going to build and build. So high tide tomorrow morning, high tide Wednesday morning, high tide Thursday morning. We might see flooding, especially Wednesday and Thursday morning, it looks like right now, but already the water is building. So it's those two separate things. One is these very spread out winds pushing water toward Florida and all the way up the coast, by the way, even into the Carolinas. And then this possibility of more of a core of the storm strengthening with stronger winds near that core. That doesn't exist yet. Is that going to develop between now and Wednesday afternoon? It's 2 days. So Hurricane Center is saying yes. We think it's probably going to happen, so we're going to forecast that to happen and get people ready for hurricane force gusts, at least in the northern Bahamas. So they have put up hurricane warnings now for the northern Bahamas just because of the timing. But you see that already by Wednesday afternoon, we have winds in some areas here over the state of Florida in the 40 mile per hour, 50 mile per hour range. So this is going to be disruptive. So by Wednesday afternoon, you really don't want to plan to be out running around, because this is when tree limbs can come down and so forth, and this can be a problem. This is not going to be a big hurricane again coming ashore, but we don't want trees falling in front of you if you're driving down the street. So Wednesday afternoon is when this is going to begin. In fact, it's going to actually pick up Wednesday morning. And then it more or less makes landfall overnight, Wednesday night into Thursday. Notice the core of hurricane force gusts there, extending from, if the forecast is absolutely perfect, and all this is based on a perfect right down the middle of the cone forecast. Notice the winds are all on the northern side of the system. Again, this is a lopsided thing. It's not a normal kind of hurricane. So everything is north of where the center comes ashore. So the idea is hurricane force winds on the Treasure Coast down to the Palm Beaches, and allowing for the fact that it could go either way. Of course, they have hurricane watches that extend farther one way or the other, because we can't depend on it going right down the middle of the cone, especially in a just developing system. As you all know that have watched me for a long time, one of my big rules is that if a storm is just developing, or it's moving slowly, or it's disorganized, the forecast errors are going to be bigger and forecasts are likely to change. So that's the case with this situation here. And then it moves inland and starts to weaken because of the inland process. But even as it's inland, it's still blowing the water against the coast. So this is why the storm surge forecast is for up to 5 feet of water above normal high tide. So if you're in a low-lying area that floods like in king tides, this is going to be a super king tide with 3 to 5 feet of water, depending on where the tide cycle is. but at the high tide cycles, up to 5 feet of water above normal high tide is the forecast right now. And that's from Brunswick all the way down south, all the way into Palm Beach County, and then for still high water, even into Broward County, and then not so much into Miami-Dade County is the forecast right now. So I just want to stress that even though we're talking about a not very strong storm relative to these super hurricanes that we've all seen, this is still going to put a lot of water against the coast, and people that live in lower lying areas, Merritt Island and Jacksonville, you're going to have water coming in to the St. Johns River. Once again, it's going to be pushed into the St. Johns River. Forecasts up to 5 feet above normal water levels at the coast, normal high tide levels at the coast. So all these rivers that face the ocean and take in the water from the ocean are all subject to very high tides. So it comes ashore and on the current forecast as a 75 mile an hour hurricane, just making hurricane strength, plus or minus, of course, always around the forecast. And that happens overnight Wednesday night, early Thursday morning. This Thursday a.m. time, to be precise, is 1 a.m., but obviously we can't pin it down to the hour at this far out. So in terms of the Florida watches and warnings, here they are. Hurricane watches in effect from about Cape Canaveral, actually up to the Volusia County line, on down, including Broward County, Miami-Dade County in a tropical storm watch, and then tropical storm watches also in effect all the way from right along the coast up in the Brunswick, Georgia area, Duval County, on down to Flagler County, and then inland, including the Orlando area, thinking that the storm is going to track somehow like that. So it'll still be a pretty good windstorm here in central Florida. It will be dying out as it goes over Florida, but a good windstorm, so they have the tropical storm watches in effect. Remember, a watch just means possible because the forecast is subject to change, and that will turn into a warning when it looks like that becomes more likely. The hurricane watch also in effect for Lake Okeechobee, and that's because that big expanse of water, you can get much stronger winds over that water. In terms of what the models are telling us, the models all go down the cone. Kind of an open question is, might the storm go out here over the Gulf somehow and then re-strengthen over that water in the Gulf and then come back ashore? The odds are low that that's going to happen. It's not impossible, but an important thing here is that the water that it's going to transverse here over the Bahamas and as it gets near Florida is very, very warm. It's almost summertime warm water. Over the Gulf, where we've had these cold fronts this year, this water is much cooler here. So the current thinking is that the system, even if it does go out over the water a little bit, is not really going to have time to re-strengthen. This is not going to be a big Gulf landfalling kind of event, it's just going to weaken over the state of Florida and then turn north in some fashion. And then it's going to quit being a tropical system and just be more like a nor'easter type storm heading on up to the north. A dip in the jet stream is coming, a cold front is coming, and that's going to turn it north. And that moisture is going to go north with it. So a lot of moisture is forecast here for the whole southeast as this thing turns north and gets involved with the jet stream. But it won't be a tropical system as it gets up there into the Carolinas. So bottom line on the models is that there's high confidence in the cone that it'll come ashore somewhere in Florida like this. Now, we have this other kind of model that really talks about the track uncertainty, and you see that somewhere here on the southeast up to the Treasure Coast in Florida, that's what it says. The center of that is right where the cone is. So the uncertainty really looks like the cone. So the cone is telling us the story. It's not going off in all kinds of directions way outside the cone. So we'll just look at the cone in this case. And here you see what I was talking about. Look how the darker reds, that's very warm water. It's going to traverse that as it gets to the state of Florida. And then up in here, it's much, much cooler water. So even if it does go offshore, it's not going to be there very long, and it's not going to have super warm water to work with. One more thing to mention about what's going to happen next with this system. So here it is over here. It comes in here, and this big system you see out here, this big dip in the jet stream here, this is going to cause all kinds of problems across the country, including a big blizzard and maybe severe weather across the middle of the country. This is coming along, and that's what's going to grab it and take it to the north and take this tropical moisture that's going to be down here and push that on up the coast in some fashion. So this is going to affect the weather on up the coast, but it's not going to be a tropical system. It's going to be more like a nor'easter or, an ugly weather kind of scenario, not some dangerous kind of storm. Okay, so back to the storm, and let's get to your questions. Well, here I see one from Thomas is asking, should I put up shutters? Let me see if I can put that here. Do we need to put up our hurricane shutters? So my rule personally, because shutters are a personal thing, my rule personally is I don't put up shutters for tropical storms. I put up shutters for hurricanes. Now, obviously, if the forecast is right, this is going to be a close call in the where they have the hurricane watch up from Broward County on up through Brevard County. That includes Indian River County and St. Lucie County, Martin County, and Palm Beach County. Hurricane watch is up. That means hurricane winds are possible. The winds north of the north sections of all this, the winds are going to come off the ocean. The south sections, they're going to come off the land. And so if it were me, I probably wouldn't, but this is a close call. Again, the rule is if it's a hurricane, you put up shutters. If it's not, you don't, because putting up shutters can be a dangerous thing. If you have shutters, if you're in the hurricane watch area, when we get to Wednesday, if you have the kind of shutters you can just close, I don't mean panels that you have to fool with, because the wind is going to be coming up. So I guess my bottom line, if I had panels, I would not. If I had shutters, I would close, and I were in the hurricane watch or by then hurricane warning area, then I would do it. So because the wind is going to slowly pick up, so it's going to get windy, and those panels are dangerous in the wind. So that would be for me. Let me just check and see. Remember, I ask if you have a question to put a Q in front of your question. Okay, so a lot of questions here about shutters. So I'm glad that we addressed that first. Michelle in Boynton Beach, so you're in the hurricane watch area. In Davie, you're in the hurricane watch area. So again, if you have panels, it's a very dicey thing. If I had panels, I wouldn't, especially if I were inland. Those wind is going to be mostly at the coast. So tropical storm force winds inland, hurricane force winds may be at the coast is how we should look at this. Here's a good question because of everything that's happened on the west coast of Florida this year. What will conditions be like on Florida's west coast? It really somewhat depends on how far west it tracks before it turns to the north. The possibility exists for some tropical storm force winds on the west coast depending on the track. So let's hold off on that until tomorrow and see let the system develop some. The forecast should become a little more reliable and see if we think it's going to swing offshore. In any case, this is not going to be a hurricane on the west coast. The question is whether it's a solid tropical storm on the west coast, which can cause some storm surge. And of course, we're very worried about the folks in southwest Florida, and it could be gusty enough to, if it were to stay kind of farther south, could be gusty enough to cause trouble with tarps that are on roofs and things like that. And so we don't want that to happen, obviously. So here's a question. Which side is the dirty side, the northeast? So the dirty side of this storm is going to be the north side of the storm, because the storm is going to come almost due east-west into the coast. So the right side is going to be where almost all the weather is, by the way. So let's imagine that this storm comes ashore, the center of it. Remember, the center is barely exists at this point, but this rough center comes ashore at Palm Beach, say, almost nothing in Miami-Dade County and very little in Broward. This is very right side loaded. So the dirty side is the north side of this, north of where the center comes ashore. So let me see. Who else is? When will Orlando experience the highest winds from Georgette? So let's go forward here with our maps a bit. And there's where the center is. So where we can see here, this is Wednesday afternoon. And so here's the time, Wednesday afternoon. And at this point, the winds are picking up in Orlando, just getting kind of gusty on Wednesday afternoon. Then as we go forward in time here, you see that it's tapering down, but this core of winds is getting closer to you. So this is Thursday afternoon. So it looks like the highest winds in Orlando will be Thursday afternoon into Thursday evening as the storm continues to weaken as it moves over land. But think of this as a Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening, maybe into the overnight time period for the strongest winds in Central Florida. Okay, let's see. Who else? We have a lot of questions here. Impacts to Vero Beach and Indian River shores along the Treasure Coast. Well, if the forecast is reasonably correct, and let me see if I can. No, it's not going to let me. Let me see. I have to back up here because I want to show you this again. Notice that if the forecast is right from the National Hurricane Center, the winds are going to be coming like this. So if the center of the storm is somewhere in the northern Bahamas, all of the Florida coast is going to be subject to strong onshore flow of winds. So in the Vero area or Fort Pierce, or there along the Treasure Coast, Indian River shores, there in Indian River County, you're going to be subject to this onshore flow and significant onshore flow. So this is why the forecast is for storm surge to be up to 5 feet above normal high tide there. So when the tides are high, expect very, very high tide. So it really depends on where you are. If you're just inland, then you can expect the winds to be in the 50 to 60 miles per hour, like off the ocean, like inland. Right at the coast, we have the potential for wind gusts up to hurricane force. So you can see that if the forecast is exactly right, these hurricane force gusts are going to affect the Vero Beach, Stewart, Fort Pierce, all the way down to Jupiter area. This is going to be where the core of these hurricane force gusts are, and that's mostly right at the coast with tropical storm force winds once you get very far inland. Okay, let me see. Who else is on with a question? Should we shutter up in Stewart? Well, as you saw there just a moment ago, Stewart, if the forecast is right, you're in there for hurricane force gusts. So since the winds are going to start to increase already by late tomorrow, I think if it were me, I would evaluate this in the morning. If the forecast stays the same and it looks like we have the possibility of a hurricane, if I were in Stewart, especially near the water, I would go ahead and put up the shutters. Let me see. So Paul asked, is there a chance of tornadoes? The answer is yes. On the right side, some tornadoes are possible on this side of the storm as these bands of rain come in. So that's possible. Tornadoes would not expect it to be super strong, but they would be moving quickly. So they're more like strong wind gusts than they are a typical tornado. Don't think of the tornadoes that we see in Oklahoma or Kansas or something. Different kind, just more like a whole burst of wind coming in. That may be how we get the hurricane force gusts, as a matter of fact. A lot of folks want to know about the shutters. Obviously, shutters in plantation. If it were me, I would not put up shutters in plantation because we're not expecting hurricane force winds that far in. You're taking a chance by not doing it, obviously, if we get winds gusting up to 60 or 70 miles per hour, because that can pick up a branch and throw it at your window. So there is, it's a tough call because it's already a little breezy out there. So if you've got panels, you got to be very careful dealing with the panels in any kind of breeze. If you have shutters that you can just close, accordion shutters or some kind of roll down shutters, then that's easy. But panels and wind or any kind of stiff breeze don't mix. You can really hurt yourself if a panel blows and hits you or cuts you or something. So that's a tough call. Let's see. Here's a question about travel, and I know a lot of folks have asked me already. We're flying Thursday from Dunedin to Indianapolis for a band competition. Should we change our flight? Yeah, Thursday in Central Florida is likely to be dicey. So I don't know how you're flying out of Dunedin, unless it must be a private flight, I guess. But yeah, Thursday weather in Central Florida, you can see here where we are. So this is Thursday afternoon. So you have the core of the winds here, and Hurricane Center forecast is for hurricane force gusts. So you'd think, reasonably strong tropical storm force winds in here. So obviously up toward Dunedin, you're on the edge of that. It's a close call. If you could go sooner, I guess I would go sooner to be safe. But it's going to be breezy. You see, this is the Hurricane Center forecasting winds over 40 miles per hour, at least in gusts everywhere in that yellow area. Obviously, Dunedin is in that. Here's a question about Jacksonville. Let me click that again. That was my fault. I clicked it twice. Would you say Jacksonville area will get a good piece of this? I think the biggest threat in Jacksonville is going to be the storm surge along the St. John's there. Of course, we had all these problems from Ian, and there's still some high water there. Excuse me a second, folks. We still have high water along the St. John's River. This is going to push water into St. John's River because the wind is going to be blowing this way. So you'll get a piece of it in terms of the wind in Jacksonville. It'll be gusty. You'll know that there's some kind of storm out there, but the bigger threat is just this huge area of wind pushing water toward the coast, and including down the St. John's, I'm afraid. So be sure you listen for all the local flood threats and so forth that are issued by the National Weather Service there in Jacksonville. What I think about flights on Thursday in Tampa, well, here's what the Hurricane Center says about where hurricane force gusts are going to be. So Tampa, you're in it or very close to where the winds are going to be quite gusty. So I think that there's a potential airplane problem in many of the airports in Central Florida on Thursday. Will all the flights be canceled? Will they? I don't know. That's airline by airline. But generally, airlines don't want to get an airplane into a situation where it might get stuck there if the forecast is a little bit wrong or something. I'm sure they'll be evaluating that on Wednesday. But there's a possibility that flights can be canceled in Tampa on Thursday. Will it hit Disney World on Wednesday, Thursday? It'll be in the vicinity of Disney World. The gusty winds, the rain, we haven't talked about the rain. Rain will be an issue. This won't be a Hurricane Ian situation, but rain will be an issue. Let me look here at what the latest forecast is for rain from the Hurricane Center. So let's see, rainfall, 2 to 4 inches with local maximum 6 inches of rain in the peninsula. Obviously, if you have 6 inches of rain, that's a lot of rain, but not a tremendous amount of rain. So this is not Again, this is not a Hurricane Ian situation, but it will be guaranteed, best we can guarantee the weather, ugly in Disney on Wednesday and Thursday. Let's see. Might this affect Key West? Minimal effects in Key West. Oh, and the powerboat races. Well, it will be kind of windy. I doubt they'll call them off. I don't know what their thresholds are there, but some of the peripheral effects of this will drive the winds around like this into the Keys. So you'll have a west or northwest wind there in the Keys from this, and it'll be a pretty good wind. You know, those power boats are obviously they do it in Florida Bay, as I recall. So that's going to push the wind into Florida Bay. So it's going to be a whole different kind of wind regime than you're used to there. Usually you get winds more out of an easterly direction. The Keys kind of block it in Florida Bay, so a little different kind of wind scenario. My guess is they'll do it, but I don't know. I don't know what their thresholds are there. I'm in Englewood and Port Charlotte. Englewood just was significantly affected by Ian, of course, just north of the Fort Myers area. There's debris everywhere from Ian. I'm scared of flying debris. Should I put up shutters? No, I would. If it were me, I would not put up shutters. I always, when I talk about giving advice on shutters, I never want to give advice. I just want to tell you what I would do. If I were in Englewood, I wouldn't put up shutters. I would pick up anything that's outside that will blow around in a gusty wind. This is not going to be a Hurricane Ian. This is not going to be a monstrous windstorm. My biggest concern is actually not so much from the debris, but for people that have tarps on their roofs. So this would be a situation where, for me, I would be trying to tie down that tarp, maybe put bricks or blocks or something on the tarp to help it stay in place in the gusty winds. That feels to me like the biggest threat there. Obviously, if there's something, trash cans or something that can blow around in any kind of wind, I mean, I would bring all that in somewhere, but heavy debris, I would not be so worried about in this situation. You're going to have winds coming in from the northwest and west in the Fort Myers, Port Charlotte, Englewood, Venice area, looks like most likely, unless the storm takes a track a little down here, a little farther south in the cone, not out of the question, and that would change the wind direction, but still, this doesn't feel like a super big windstorm. I mean, let's see what happens tomorrow with it, but odds are very high that this is not going to be a big wind threat in Lee County. There's another question from Lee County. Of course, we're all thinking about you folks in Lee County. Do we have to prepare for wind having so much debris on the ground? So again, it's mostly the tarps. This is not going to be something that's going to pick up heavy things and blow them. You just use your good common sense. Look outside and see if there are light things that might be picked up. What preparation should we take in Miami? There will be some local coastal flooding, so areas that flood in king tides, you're going to get some extra flooding, so just be aware of that. And by the way, if you get that king tide flooding, that type of flooding, parts of Miami Beach and Hollywood, Hollywood's obviously not in Miami, but the lower lying areas where the king tides, and this is going to be a king tide plus in Miami, that's salt water, and you don't want to drive through that. That's really bad for your car. So if you are in a situation where the high tide is flooding, that water you want to avoid because that'll rust the bottom of your car, and that's really bad. And this is true all the way up the coast, by the way. If you're in an area where you're going to get tidal flooding, do your best not to drive your car in that. And if you do drive your car in it, if there's any way you can, get the hose out afterward and wash underneath of it and try and get that salt off there because it's nasty bad for your car. Should I take Amtrak on Friday from Deerfield north to Tampa. By Friday, this storm should be well north. So Amtrak should be working fine unless there's some kind of issue I don't know about. So by Friday, the storm should be affecting points north, Georgia and into the Carolinas. North Florida maybe on Friday. Lots of questions here about shutters in South Florida. Again, if it were me, I would not put up my shutters inland in Broward and not in Miami-Dade. There is a hurricane watch out for Broward County. The reason for the hurricane watch is, remember that this kind of ball of hurricane force winds is forecast in the current forecast to be Palm Beach and north. But if the track is a little bit farther south, it could be Broward County getting those hurricane force gusts. That's why, and potentially even some hurricane force sustained winds. That's just in case the storm stays to the left side of the cone. That's why the hurricane watch is up for Broward. Now, this will be mostly a coastal, right at the coast, like Fort Lauderdale Beach, right along Hollywood Beach, right along the beaches where I would be thinking about shutters. Probably I would evaluate tomorrow before doing it. Inland, if it were me, I would, because be more likely tropical storm force winds, I would not put shutters on my home in Weston or Plantation or inland sections of Broward County. But this is a personal call, and I want you guys to make the decision. Think strong tropical storm force winds. You're taking a risk anytime you have strongest winds without shutters, but there's also a danger of that, obviously. Here's a question about power outages. I expect we're going to have some power outages, and we get power outages anywhere with tropical storm force gusts because branches go down over trees. I would not expect widespread power outages with a storm like this. Obviously, where the winds are strongest, if this core of the storm develops and it comes and it affects the Treasure Coast and the Palm Beaches, something like that, then that would be where we'd have the most power outages. But with tropical storm force winds, we do normally see some power outages, but more on a scattered basis. Power outages expected in Orlando. Some, I would think, but not some kind of crazy widespread thing like in Ian or in Irma, for example. Let me see. Danielle is worried about the Peace River flooding, and the Peace River is over there north of Fort Myers in southwest Florida. I don't think we're going to get enough rain. We still have the flooding. So get to the end of the question, is the flooding going to be as bad as with Ian for our rivers? Absolutely 100% not. If for some reason, some way, some 6 inches of rain poured on that river, you could get some minor flooding, but just don't think Ian in this case. This is a whole different kind of scenario, and the idea is 6 inches of isolated rain. Remember, we had double that in a big, long swath across Florida with Ian. So entirely different kind of storm. This is going to be more bands coming in off the Atlantic Ocean causing rain, and then widespread areas of light rain, not huge bands of super downpours. There's a question about the new river in Fort Lauderdale. How far up the river will the storm surge go? Well, in Fort Lauderdale, the storm surge is forecast to be 2 to 4 feet, and it'll go on up the new river if you get storm surge there. Remember that, looking over here at the map, that the winds are going to come around the center this way, right? They're going to be pushing in this way. So even though when the storm is out here over the Bahamas, some water is going to get pushed down when the winds are coming around from the north down, and that'll make water rise along the coast, and some of that water rise will push into the intracoastal and into the New River. Not in a big way. So, talk to your marina or your boating friends. And I think this is going to be a situation where you put spring lines on your boat so your boat can rise a few feet. This is not going to be a giant storm surge, something like we saw in Ian on the West Coast, or we saw in Andrew. It's not going to be that kind of thing. This is going to be maybe a few feet water rise, taking the high tide and everything into account in Broward County. So I'm not enough of a boater anymore to know exactly what the threshold is for when you can put the spring lines on the boat and just allow it to rise up and down in the dock, and it probably is dependent on exactly where you have it docked. But don't think giant storm surge coming up the New River is the bottom line. Let's see. So in Weston, should we bring in outdoor furniture? I would not have furniture sitting outside, because if the winds gust to 40, 50 miles an hour, that can move that furniture, knock it around. Why not bring it in? The winds are going to be gusty over most of the state of Florida. So you don't want to have trash cans out. You don't want outdoor furniture outside. You don't want plants sitting outside that are light and could blow around. There's just no reason not to take care. We have time to do it. These winds aren't going to pick up until really Wednesday. It's going to be the noticeably windier day, although starting tomorrow we'll notice some. Let's see. Do you feel the storm will come in north of West Palm? Family is in Jupiter Farms. On the current forecast, the Jupiter area is going to get significant winds at least gusting to at or near hurricane strength. But again, this is not a big devastating storm. If I was your family in the Jupiter area, I would be thinking shutters at this point, but I'd probably evaluate it tomorrow morning. But the winds are going to start picking up tomorrow already, and if it's panel shutters, you're going to have to evaluate whether I'm going to take a chance putting up those panel shutters in the wind or not, because panel shutters are nasty in the wind, and people get hurt in panel shutters in the wind. But Jupiter is forecast to be in the strongest winds in this storm. At this point, the forecast is for at least gusts to hurricane strength. How about Lakeland? Lakeland, you can see here on the map of Thursday. This is Thursday afternoon-ish on the map. The strongest winds that are left with the storm, because it's weakening as it moves over inland, are in the Lakeland area. So plan on gusty winds. All those things I was talking about for just taking reasonable care to not have things blowing around. Don't park your car under a big tree branch or something. Just use reasonable good sense for the idea that good, strong winds, maybe gusting to 50 or 60 miles per hour, are going to be in the area, and that can knock things around, take down tree branches, take down even some weaker trees with that kind of wind. So this is going to call for everybody using, just thinking about, okay, what would happen here if we had really strong gusty winds in our area? Not the kind of winds that are going to knock down houses and so forth, but just, strong gusty winds in the strong tropical storm strength range. 40, 50, 60 mile an hour wind gusts, maybe up to 70 in some areas. When would it be considered unsafe to drive from South Florida to Orlando? So I would not, at this point, plan to do that on Wednesday. Wednesday morning is probably okay, but not guaranteed. If you have to go, I would go Tuesday. Like I said, on the current schedule, Wednesday morning is probably okay. But let me go, just because this is really what affects people more than anything, I think, is... I'm going to go back on, just look at this one more time, because then I have to go because I got to be on Fox Weather. So here you see Wednesday, here we are Wednesday afternoon. The winds are already picking up, in over the state, but they're just picking up here. And then later in the day, Wednesday, the stronger winds come in. So first part of Wednesday, you should be okay, but it's a little bit risky. All right, guys, I got to go. I'll be on Fox Weather here for the rest of the afternoon, and be back here tomorrow online. And you guys stay safe, and we'll be in touch.